The island of Bermuda, 21 miles long, sun-drenched and surrounded by coral reefs, is often called paradise. With its pastel cottages, pink sand beaches, and British charm, it draws nearly 1 million tourists a year. And in 1996, it seemed like the perfect place for a summer getaway. But for 17-year-old Canadian Rebecca Jane Middleton, it became the setting of an unimaginable horror. Rebecca and her best friend Jasmine Means had just graduated from high school in Belleville, Ontario. They were bright, well-raised girls with dreams of university, travel, and freedom. When the opportunity came to spend part of the summer in Bermuda, where Jasmine's father lived, both girls were thrilled. It was to be their first real adventure away from home, a safe and beautiful celebration of youth. They arrived in late June, laughing, carefree, and excited to explore. For the first several days, they did what any two teenagers would: lounged on beaches, snapped photos, rode scooters, and soaked up the island's calm, easy rhythm. But just over a week into the trip, on the night of July 2nd, 1996, everything changed. After a casual bonfire gathering near the beach, Rebecca and Jasmine met two young Bermudian men, Justice Smith and Kirk Mundy. Rebecca stayed behind with them while Jasmine returned home early. She would never see her friend again. Rebecca never made it home that night. The next morning, her lifeless body was discovered near Ferry Reach, a quiet, rural area of Bermuda, by a taxi driver. She had been raped, tortured, and stabbed over 35 times. Her throat had been slashed. Her hands and arms bore deep defensive wounds, showing she had fought with everything she had. Most disturbingly, paramedics reported that she was still alive when found, clinging to life with shallow breaths. She died en route to the hospital. News traveled fast. Police quickly identified Smith and Mundy as suspects. One of them confessed, then the other did too. With two confessions, forensic evidence, and witness reports placing them with Rebecca that night, it should have been an open and shut case. But what followed would devastate her family and shame an entire justice system. Through a series of catastrophic errors, including a rushed plea deal, mishandled evidence, and failures in the legal process, neither man was ever convicted of Rebecca's murder. One walked free after a botched trial, the other had already been granted immunity. Bermuda's colonial-era legal code prevented the case from ever being reopened. The world was shocked. A teenage girl had been savagely killed. The killers were known, and yet justice would never be served. Her parents, David and Janet Middleton, began a decades-long campaign for answers. They spoke to governments, the press, human rights courts, but the system that failed their daughter never made it right. Her death became more than just a crime. It became a symbol of everything that could go wrong when power, privilege, and incompetence collide. Rebecca Middleton was supposed to return home with a tan, a scrapbook, and stories of sunsets. Instead, she returned in a coffin. This is her story, not just of her death, but of a world that let it happen, a paradise that turned into a graveyard, and a name that refuses to be forgotten. In Belleville, Ontario, nestled between the cities of Toronto and Ottawa, Rebecca Jane Middleton lived a life filled with promise. She was the youngest of two daughters, a spirited and artistic teen with bright blue eyes and a personality that lit up rooms. At just 17, she had her whole future ahead of her: university dreams, plans to become a teacher, and a heart that always saw the good in people. She loved horseback riding, drawing, and pop music. She adored her family and was fiercely close to her best friend, Jasmine Means. Together, they had been dreaming of the summer after high school for months, the freedom of youth, the world waiting just outside their door. When Jasmine's father offered to fly the girls to Bermuda for a post-graduation vacation, it seemed like a dream come true. To their parents, it was a safe bet. Bermuda had long been advertised as one of the safest tourist destinations in the world. A British overseas territory with a reputation for civility, charm, and almost non-existent violent crime, it was considered ideal for young travelers. In late June 1996, Rebecca and Jasmine boarded a plane to the island, sun in their eyes, excitement in their hearts. They were welcomed by Jasmine's father and spent the first week doing exactly what teens should: walking the beaches, trying local food, laughing under the stars. They rented mopeds, took photos, and wrote postcards home. "It's even more beautiful than I imagined," Rebecca wrote to her family. She called home frequently, always upbeat, always positive. Her mother, Janet, later recalled that Rebecca sounded happier than she had in months. It was supposed to be the last vacation before real life began. No one imagined that real life would end in the most brutal, unforgiving way. On July 2nd, 1996, the girls went out to a casual beach party near the Southampton parish. Bonfires burned low as young locals and tourists mingled under the moonlight. It was here that Rebecca and Jasmine met two Bermudian men, Justice Smith and Kirk Mundy. At first glance, they seemed friendly, charming even. They offered to show the girls around the island, chat, and ride scooters. As the night wore on, Jasmine decided she was tired and ready to go home. Rebecca, however, wasn't done. She was still smiling, curious, open-hearted, and she trusted the two men enough to accept their offer for a ride. Jasmine would later say it wasn't unusual. "We were just two kids exploring. She thought they were nice." That decision, the kind teenagers make every day, would be her last. Sometime later that night, Rebecca was taken to Fairy Reach, a secluded part of Bermuda rarely visited by tourists. What happened next remains one of the most disturbing crimes in the island's history. Back at Jasmine's father's house, as the hours passed and Rebecca never returned, anxiety turned to fear. Jasmine began calling around. By sunrise, she was desperate. And then the phone rang. It was the police. They had found a young woman matching Rebecca's description. Jasmine was asked what she had worn that night. A floral tank top, jeans, white shoes. The confirmation came within hours. Rebecca was dead. For her family, still thousands of miles away in Canada, the news was impossible to absorb. Their youngest daughter, who had left for paradise, would never come home. In the early morning hours of July 3rd, 1996, a taxi driver was taking a quiet route through Fairy Reach, a remote stretch of road in Bermuda's St. George's Parish. As he passed a bushy area just off the roadside, he noticed what he first thought was a discarded bundle of clothing or garbage, but something about it seemed wrong. He slowed his car, stepped out, and then saw her. It was the body of a young woman, bloodied, barely dressed, twisted in the dirt and brush. She was still breathing. Emergency responders arrived quickly. What they found was horrifying. Rebecca Middleton, age 17, had been brutally attacked. Her throat had been slashed, and her body was riddled with over 35 stab wounds. Her arms and hands showed deep defensive injuries, clear signs that she had fought for her life. There were also signs of sexual assault and trauma consistent with prolonged abuse. Yet somehow she was still alive when discovered. She died shortly after, on the way to the hospital. The crime scene offered grim evidence of what had happened. Her clothing, blood-soaked and torn, lay nearby. The brush was disturbed. Tire tracks and a trail of blood suggested she had been dragged and dumped. She had not died where she had been attacked. She had been discarded. Rebecca's body was removed from the scene, and the investigation began. Word quickly spread that she had last been seen the night before with two young Bermudian men, Justice Smith and Kirk Mundy. Witnesses placed her with them at the beach party. Neighbors heard a scooter racing near Fairy Reach around the time of the attack. By midday, police were already closing in. What no one yet realized was that this wasn't just a murder. It was a crime of unimaginable cruelty, one that would soon become an even greater scandal, not because of what had been done to Rebecca, but because of what the justice system would fail to do in her name. The day after Rebecca Middleton's body was discovered, Bermuda police moved swiftly. They had strong leads. Multiple witnesses placed Justice Smith and Kirk Mundy with Rebecca the night before. Both were known to local law enforcement. Their names came up again and again in interviews. Within 48 hours, both men were arrested. At first, the interrogation process seemed to go well. Mundy, who had a record for petty crimes, cracked quickly. He confessed to being present during the attack, saying he had witnessed Smith sexually assault and stab Rebecca. He claimed he was too scared to stop it and tried to paint himself as a reluctant bystander. In exchange for his cooperation, police offered him a deal: plead guilty to being an accessory after the fact and testify against Smith. But just as the prosecution began to build its case against Smith, a disturbing discovery was made. Smith had also confessed separately. He admitted to being involved in the rape and acknowledged stabbing Rebecca, though he downplayed his level of involvement. The statements were detailed and matched forensic evidence. Now, both suspects had confessed, but Bermuda's prosecutors had already locked in Mundy's plea bargain without realizing how deep his involvement was. Legally, they couldn't reverse it. When Smith's case came before the court, his defense argued that his confession had been improperly obtained. Due to errors in documentation, lack of legal counsel during key portions of the interrogation, and procedural mishandling, the judge ruled the confession inadmissible. Without it, the prosecution's case collapsed. No physical evidence tied Smith directly to the murder, and with Mundy no longer testifying against him, their star witness was gone. Smith walked free. Mundy, already sentenced as an accessory, could not be retried due to Bermuda's strict double jeopardy laws, which barred someone from being charged again for the same crime. 2 men, 2 confessions, 0 murder charges. Investigators were outraged. International observers were stunned. The Middleton family was shattered. Legal experts later identified over 20 procedural errors in the case, from poor communication between police and prosecutors to misfiled documents and a failure to follow established protocols during interrogations. Even Bermudian officials admitted the case was mishandled at every level. What should have been an open and shut prosecution became an international scandal. Rebecca had not only been murdered, she had been denied justice by the very institutions meant to protect her. After the collapse of the case, Bermuda's justice system went silent, but the world began to speak. The sheer absurdity of what had happened, 2 men confessing to the brutal murder and rape of a teenager and walking free, triggered international outrage. The Middleton family, shattered and in mourning, refused to let the system bury their daughter a second time. They turned their grief into activism. Janet and David Middleton began a relentless campaign for justice. They spoke to the press, met with diplomats, and reached out to human rights organizations. Janet wrote editorials, appeared on Canadian television, and told her daughter's story to anyone who would listen. The campaign quickly gained traction. Canadian officials, including members of parliament, demanded answers from Bermuda. Human rights groups accused the island of hiding behind outdated colonial laws to protect a broken system. Petitions flooded in from across North America and Europe. But Bermuda held firm. Their courts had ruled. The confessions had been declared inadmissible. The double jeopardy protections were legally binding. There would be no retrial. What's more, neither Smith nor Mundy ever showed remorse. Mundy served a short sentence for his plea deal conviction as an accessory and was released. He reportedly bragged to acquaintances about getting away with murder. Smith, despite nearly confessing in open court, resumed his life without consequence. The Middletons, devastated but determined, turned to the United Kingdom, since Bermuda was still a British overseas territory. They appealed to the governor of Bermuda, to the Privy Council in London, and even brought their case before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Each time, they were told the same thing. The courts could not reopen the case. There were no legal pathways left. Janet Middleton once said, "We weren't just fighting for Rebecca. We were fighting for every victim the system had failed and would continue to fail." Their fight wasn't only for punishment. It was for acknowledgement, for someone to say officially and forever, Rebecca was murdered and the system failed her. In 2006, 10 years after Rebecca's death, a small victory came. Bermuda's parliament announced reforms to some of its criminal procedures, particularly those involving double jeopardy and confession evidence. But the changes came too late for Rebecca. Her case could still never be reopened. Despite the global attention, the vigils, the media coverage, and the pleas for justice, the island's legal system stood as it was the day she died, silent and unmoved. And for the Middletons, justice remained a ghost. Nearly 3 decades have passed since the night Rebecca Middleton was taken from her family, from her country, and from a world that failed to protect her. But her story never faded. It remains one of the most shocking examples of justice denied, a case in which everyone knew who committed the crime, but no one paid for it. 2 men confessed. One made a deal, the other walked free. And Rebecca, 17 and full of life, was reduced to a legal mishap, her suffering never acknowledged in court, her killers never called what they were. The Middleton family never stopped fighting. For years, Janet Middleton carried a binder of documents, court transcripts, letters, press clippings, to every meeting, every interview, every parliament office she visited. She relived Rebecca's murder again and again, not because she wanted to, but because no one else would carry it. She became her daughter's only voice. "I had to say her name over and over because the courts wouldn't," she once told reporters. "They wouldn't speak for her, so I did." Despite the pain, the Middletons turned their fight into a broader movement. Their activism pushed Bermuda to revise elements of its criminal justice system. It created international conversations about double jeopardy, victims' rights, and the blind spots in colonial-era legal systems that still exist today. But for the family, those changes came with a bitter edge. Because even as Bermuda acknowledged flaws, it never reopened Rebecca's case. The laws may have changed, but the injustice stood frozen in time. Kirk Mundy eventually left Bermuda. He lived quietly, never retried, never punished for what forensic experts and his own confession said he had done. Justice Smith, too, carried on, living under the legal protection of a court that let a confession slip through procedural cracks. And Rebecca? She returned to Belleville in a coffin. Her body buried, her future stolen, her story still a raw wound in the hearts of her family and friends. In the years since, her name has appeared in books, articles, documentaries, and legal lectures, always followed by the same haunting phrase. And no one was ever convicted. But Rebecca Middleton is more than a headline, more than a case study. She was a real girl, with dreams, fears, and people who loved her. She died in paradise. And in doing so, revealed the paradise was never real.